The day Adelaide Keller learned she wasn't woman enough was the same day her mother's words cut deeper than any knife could. Standing in her mother's kitchen in Manassas, Colorado, with the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the window, Adelaide's hands trembled as her mother's condemnation echoed off the walls. 5 years of marriage and not a single child to show for it. You're as barren as the desert, Adelaide. Your husband deserves better than a woman who can't give him sons. Adelaide clutched the edge of her apron, watching as her mother vigorously kneaded bread dough, punctuating each harsh word with a forceful push into the yielding mass. At 25, Adelaide had endured these comments with increasing frequency since her wedding day to Thomas Keller, who had been claimed by pneumonia last winter. Now a widow living alone on the edge of town, Adelaide had come to help her mother prepare for the church social, not to be reminded of her failure as a woman. "Mother, please," Adelaide whispered, her throat tight. "Please what? Stop speaking the truth. The good Lord made women for bearing children. What use is a woman who can't fulfill her purpose?" Martha Barrett wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and fixed Adelaide with a stare that had made her daughter shrink since childhood. "It's why Thomas never built you that house he promised. Why bother with more rooms when there'd be no children to fill them?" Adelaide didn't respond. The accusation wasn't new, but it stung freshly each time. She quietly continued arranging biscuits on the baking sheet, focusing on keeping her hands steady despite the pain blooming in her chest. The year was 1878, and Manassas, Colorado was a town still finding its footing in the rugged landscape of the San Luis Valley. Like many frontier communities, it valued strong men and fertile women who could populate the West. Adelaide's childlessness made her an object of pity, and to some like her mother, an embarrassment. The summer heat pressed down on the town like a wool blanket as Adelaide left her mother's house an hour later, basket of fresh bread clutched against her chest. She walked with her head down, avoiding the gazes of townspeople going about their business. She knew what they thought. Poor Adelaide Keller couldn't give Thomas children, and now he's gone. What will become of her? She was so focused on the dusty path beneath her boots that she didn't see the man until she collided with his broad chest. The impact sent her basket tumbling to the ground, bread loaves spilling into the dirt. "I beg your pardon, madam," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her shoulders. Adelaide looked up into eyes the color of a summer sky, set in a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn leather vest and faded blue shirt. Dust covered his boots, suggesting he'd ridden far. "The fault is mine, sir. I wasn't watching my path." Adelaide knelt quickly to retrieve her scattered goods, embarrassment burning her cheeks. The stranger crouched beside her, helping gather the bread. "These look too fine to be meeting the dirt," he said, brushing off a loaf with gentle care. "You're baking, madam." "My mother's," Adelaide admitted, accepting the bread he handed back. "I was merely the assistant." He smiled then, a warm expression that transformed his weathered face. "Lucky mother to have such help." He stood and offered his hand. "Yates Sullivan, at your service." Adelaide hesitated before placing her gloved fingers in his calloused palm, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Adelaide Keller," she replied, quickly withdrawing her hand once she was standing. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Keller." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, giving Adelaide the impression of a man who laughed easily. "It's Miss Keller now," she corrected softly. "My husband passed last winter." Understanding and sympathy flashed across his features. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam." An awkward silence stretched between them before Adelaide clutched her basket closer. "I should be going. Good day, Mr. Sullivan." "Good day, Miss Keller," he replied, tipping his hat as she hurried past. Adelaide could feel his eyes on her back as she walked away, and something about his gaze made her straighten her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly higher than she had when she'd left her mother's house. Yates Sullivan had come to Manassas with little more than his horse, his saddle, and the skills he'd acquired over 15 years of working cattle from Texas to Montana. At 32, he'd seen enough of the West to know when a town had potential. Manassas wasn't the biggest or the richest, but it had good water and was growing steadily. He'd been hired by Edward Thornton, the wealthiest rancher in the valley, to help manage his expanding herd and train the local boys in proper cattle handling. That evening, Yates sat at a corner table in the town's only saloon, nursing a whiskey and observing the room. His attention was drawn to a conversation at the bar, where three men were speaking loudly enough for their words to carry. "Saw you talking to the Keller widow today, Sullivan," said a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache. "Word of friendly advice, don't waste your time there. Pretty face, but nothing behind it." Yates kept his expression neutral. "Don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said evenly. The man turned, sizing Yates up before approaching his table. "Frank Wilson," he said, extending a meaty hand. "Run the mercantile. This here's Jacob Mills and Pete Dawson," he added, gesturing to his companions who nodded in greeting. "Yates Sullivan," he replied, shaking Wilson's hand firmly. "Working for Mr. Thornton now." "Good man, Thornton," Wilson said, pulling out a chair uninvited. "So, about the Keller woman, I'm not in the habit of discussing ladies in saloons," Yates interrupted, his tone polite but firm. Wilson chuckled. "Lady's a generous term. Been married 5 years without a single child to show for it. Even her own mother says she's barren as stone. Her husband worked himself to death trying to make something of that little farm of theirs, probably hoping for a son who'd never come." Yates felt a flicker of anger at the casual cruelty. "Sounds like you know an awful lot about private matters. No secrets in a town this size," Wilson replied with a shrug. "Martha Barrett, that's her mother, she's been saying for years the girl's defective somehow, can't fulfill a woman's purpose. Shame, too, Keller was a decent fellow." Yates drained his whiskey and stood, dropping coins on the table. "I'd say a woman's got more purpose than just breeding, Mr. Wilson, and a man who judges folks based on town gossip isn't someone whose opinion I'm likely to value. Good evening, gentlemen." He felt their stares as he walked out into the night air, but he didn't care. Something about the sadness in Adelaide Keller's eyes had struck him, and hearing her dismissed so callously didn't sit well with him. The next morning found Adelaide at her small farm on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much a modest cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and 10 acres that Thomas had been slowly cultivating before illness took him. She'd managed to keep the chickens laying and a small kitchen garden producing, but the larger fields were beyond her ability to tend alone. She'd hired help when she could afford it, but her funds were dwindling. She was struggling with a stuck well pump when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Shielding her eyes against the morning sun, she recognized the broad-shouldered figure of Yates Sullivan approaching on a chestnut gelding. "Miss Keller," he called, touching his hat brim. "Good morning to you." "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you out this way?" He dismounted with easy grace, leading his horse toward her. "Mr. Thornton mentioned you might have some grazing land available for lease. Thought I'd come see it for myself." Adelaide blinked in surprise. She hadn't approached Thornton about leasing her land. I haven't spoken to Mr. Thornton about any arrangement." Yates had the good grace to look slightly abashed. "Forgive me. I may have suggested the idea to him when I heard you had land sitting unused. We need additional pasture for some of the younger stock." He glanced at the pump she'd been fighting, having trouble with that. "It's nothing I can't manage," she said quickly, though her sore hands told a different story. "I'm sure that's true, but I'd be obliged if you'd let me take a look. My father was something of a well expert back in Texas." Without waiting for permission, he moved toward the pump, rolled up his sleeves, and began examining the mechanism. Adelaide watched, conflicted between pride and practicality. She needed the pump working, and her efforts had proven fruitless. "Your land," Yates said conversationally as he worked. "How much of it is suitable for grazing?" "About 8 acres, she replied. "The soil's good, but I haven't been able to work it properly since." She trailed off, not wanting to invite pity. "Since your husband passed," he finished gently. "I understand. Land doesn't wait for grief, does it?" The simple acknowledgement of her loss without judgment loosened something in Adelaide's chest. "No, it doesn't. The seasons come and go regardless." With a few deft movements, Yates freed whatever had been jamming the pump. Water began to flow, clear and cold. "There we are, just needed a firm hand." "Thank you," Adelaide said, genuinely grateful. About the land, what terms would Mr. Thornton be proposing? Fair market rate for grazing rights paid quarterly. We'd handle fencing and maintenance. It would give you steady income without the burden of working the land yourself. He paused, looking at her directly. And I'd make sure everything was done right. You wouldn't be taken advantage of. Something in his tone made Adelaide believe him, though experience had taught her to be cautious with men's promises. I'd need to consider it carefully. It's all I have left of my husband's dreams. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, there's no rush, Miss Keller. Think on it, and I'll come by in a few days for your answer. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. By the way, I noticed your barn roof has some weakened spots. If you've got the supplies, I could take a look at it for you sometime. Adelaide straightened her spine. I wouldn't want to impose on your time, Mr. Sullivan. It would be no imposition, he said simply. Just a neighbor helping a neighbor. After he'd ridden away, Adelaide stood by the now functioning pump, watching his figure grow smaller in the distance. There had been no pity in his eyes, only respect, something she'd seen too rarely since becoming both childless and widowed. That Sunday, Adelaide sat in her usual pew at the small white church that served as Manasseh's spiritual center. She wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton with lace at the collar, one of the few fine things Thomas had given her, and kept her eyes forward during the sermon, though she could feel the stares and whispers. It had been 10 months since Thomas died, and some in town already thought it improper that she maintained the farm alone rather than returning to her parents' home or seeking another husband immediately. As the congregation filed out after the service, Adelaide found herself face to face with her mother and father on the church steps. Adelaide, Martha Barrett said, her critical eye taking in her daughter's appearance. You're looking thin. Are you eating properly? Yes, Mother, Adelaide replied. The chickens are laying well and my garden is producing. You can't live on eggs and vegetables forever, her mother sniffed. Your father and I have been talking. It's time you considered your future. Pastor Williams mentioned that his cousin is coming to visit next month, a widower from Denver with a good position at the bank there. No children, but he's looking to start a family. The implication was clear, and it stung worse than usual. I'm not ready to consider remarriage, Mother. Ready or not, you need to be practical, Martha insisted. You're not getting any younger, and with your condition, you can't afford to be choosy. A woman alone is a burden on the community. Adelaide's father, George Barrett, a quiet man who generally let his wife do the talking, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Your mother means well, Adelaide. We just worry about you out there alone. I'm managing just fine, Adelaide said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Mr. Thornton has offered to lease my grazing land. It will provide enough income for me to maintain the farm. Martha's eyebrows rose. Edward Thornton, when did you speak with him? His new foreman brought the offer, Adelaide explained. Mr. Sullivan. A knowing look passed between her parents. The tall fellow from Texas, her father asked, seems a capable sort. He fixed my well pump, Adelaide said, immediately regretting the admission when she saw the gleam in her mother's eye. Did he now? And I suppose he just happened to be passing by. Martha's tone was arch. Adelaide, you must be careful not to encourage attention. Men like that drifters with no roots, they're not looking for wives, especially ones who can't give them children. The familiar shame washed over Adelaide, but before she could respond, a deep voice spoke from behind her. Good morning, Mrs. Barrett, Mr. Barrett. Miss Keller. Adelaide turned to find Yates Sullivan standing there, looking unexpectedly polished in a clean white shirt and dark vest. He'd clearly made an effort for church, though his tan marked him as a man who spent most of his time outdoors. Mr. Sullivan, Adelaide acknowledged, conscious of her mother's appraising gaze. I was hoping to speak with you about that land arrangement, Yates said. Perhaps you'd allow me to walk you home and we could discuss the details. Before Adelaide could respond, Martha stepped forward. Mr. Sullivan, isn't it? We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Martha Barrett, Adelaide's mother, and this is her father, George. Perhaps you'd care to join us for Sunday dinner. We could all discuss this business arrangement together. Adelaide caught the warning in her mother's smile. Martha Barrett had never approved of her daughter conducting business without male supervision, believing it improper and beyond a woman's capabilities. "That's very kind, madam," Yates replied smoothly, "but I wouldn't want to impose. I know Sunday dinner is for family." "Nonsense," Martha insisted. "Any friend of Adelaide's is welcome at our table, and it would give us a chance to learn more about you and your intentions regarding my daughter's property." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm at the subtle emphasis her mother placed on intentions. Yates's gaze flicked to Adelaide, a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod, knowing that refusing would only lead to a more difficult conversation with her mother later. "In that case, I'd be honored," he said. "Thank you for your hospitality." Martha looked pleased with herself. "Excellent. Adelaide, you'll ride with us in the wagon, of course." "Actually, Mother," Adelaide said with sudden resolve, "I think I'll walk with Mr. Sullivan. We can discuss the preliminary terms before dinner. You and Father go ahead and we'll join you shortly." Martha's lips thinned in disapproval, but with the church crowd milling around, she couldn't very well object without creating a scene. "Very well, don't dawdle. The roast will be done at 1 o'clock sharp." As her parents walked toward their wagon, Yates offered his arm to Adelaide. She hesitated before placing her hand lightly on his sleeve. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly as they began walking slowly in the direction of her parents' house. "My mother can be overwhelming." "I don't mind," Yates replied, his pace relaxed. "Free Sunday dinner is nothing to turn down. Besides, if we're to be doing business together, meeting your family seems proper." Adelaide cast him a sidelong glance. "Is that what we're doing? Business? For now," he said simply. "Unless you'd prefer otherwise." His directness caught her off guard. Most men in town either avoided her entirely or spoke to her with careful pity. Yates Sullivan did neither. "Mr. Sullivan, I should warn you," she said after a moment. "My mother will likely mention certain personal matters during dinner. She lacks discretion on topics most people would consider private." "About your marriage?" he asked, his voice gentle but matter of fact. Adelaide swallowed hard. "Yes, and my failure in it." Yates stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Miss Keller, may I speak plainly?" She nodded, bracing herself for whatever judgment might come. "I've already heard the town gossip about you not having children. I want you to know that I don't put stock in such talk, nor do I consider it any measure of a person's worth." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Whether you choose to lease your land to Thornton's ranch or not, I'll respect your decision as a businesswoman, not as a widow or anything else the town might label you." For a moment, Adelaide couldn't speak, too stunned by his words. "Thank you," she finally managed. "That's unusual thinking around here." He offered a small smile. "I've never much cared for being usual." He extended his arm again. "Shall we? I wouldn't want to earn your mother's displeasure by making you late." As they walked toward the Barrett home, Adelaide felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense that someone was seeing her. Adelaide, not just Thomas Keller's barren widow. Martha Barrett's Sunday dinner was, as always, a showcase of her domestic talents. The table groaned under the weight of roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from her garden. Adelaide took her usual seat, with Yates directed to sit opposite her. Her younger sister Beatrice, recently engaged to the banker's son, sat to her left, while her parents took the heads of the table. "Mr. Sullivan," Martha began as she served generous portions onto fine china plates, "Adelaide tells us you're working for Edward Thornton now." "Have you been in the cattle business long?" "Yes, madam. Since I was 16, Yates replied, accepting the plate she handed him with thanks. "Started as a ranch hand in Texas, worked my way up to foreman by 25. I've driven cattle from San Antonio to Montana." "And what brings you to our little Manassas?" George Barrett asked. "Not exactly on the main cattle trails, are we? Wanted something more permanent than drift work," Yates explained. "Mr. Thornton's expanding his operation, looking to improve his breeding stock. He offered good terms and the chance to build something lasting. Seemed like the right time to put down roots." Martha nodded approvingly. "Very sensible. A man your age should be thinking about establishing himself." She cast a meaningful glance at Adelaide. "And a family, of course." "Do you have people back in Texas, Mr. Sullivan?" "Mother," Adelaide murmured in warning. "It's a natural question, Adelaide," Martha said dismissively before turning expectant eyes back to Yates. "My parents passed some years back," he replied easily. No wife or children. Just a married sister in San Antonio with 4 little ones of her own. Martha's expression turned sympathetic. I am sorry to hear about your parents, but how fortunate your sister has been blessed with children. There's no greater joy, I always say. Another pointed look at Adelaide. Though not everyone is so fortunate. Adelaide stared at her plate, the food suddenly tasteless in her mouth. Fortune takes many forms, Mrs. Barrett, Yates said, his tone still respectful but with a new firmness. My mother used to say that the good Lord gives different gifts to different people. Not everyone's meant for the same path. A lovely sentiment, Martha replied with a thin smile, but the Bible is quite clear on a woman's purpose. Be fruitful and multiply. It's the natural order of things. Adelaide felt the familiar shame creeping up her neck, knowing what was coming next. Adelaide's husband, God rest his soul, was so hoping for children, Martha continued, as if Adelaide weren't sitting right there. 5 years they tried with nothing to show for it. The poor man worked himself to illness, I'm convinced, trying to build a legacy that would never come. Mother, please, Adelaide whispered, her hands trembling beneath the table. Yates's eyes found Adelaide's across the table, steady and somehow reassuring. Miss Keller seems to be doing an admirable job maintaining her farm on her own, he observed. That's a legacy too, isn't it? Land well tended, a home preserved. Martha waved a dismissive hand. A temporary situation, surely. No woman should be alone managing property. It's not natural. Which is why I'm pleased you're considering this arrangement with Mr. Thornton. It would relieve Adelaide of responsibilities too heavy for her shoulders. I don't find them too heavy, Adelaide said quietly, but with unexpected firmness. I may not have children, but I can certainly manage land and make business decisions. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only by the sound of forks against plates. Beatrice shot her sister a sympathetic glance. Well, George said finally, clearly attempting to ease the tension. Tell us more about Mr. Thornton's plans for expanding his herd, Mr. Sullivan. I hear he's bringing in some of those English breeds. The conversation shifted to safer territory, and Adelaide gradually relaxed, though she avoided her mother's gaze for the remainder of the meal. When dessert had been served, Martha's famous apple pie Yates deftly steered the discussion back to the land lease. Mr. and Mrs. Barrett, with your permission, I'd like to offer Miss Keller a fair written contract for her grazing land. Mr. Thornton has authorized me to offer $12 an acre annually, with quarterly payments. We would maintain all fencing and ensure the land isn't overused. George Barrett's eyebrows rose. That's generous. Market rate is closer to 9 or 10. Mr. Thornton values good neighbors and fair dealing, Yates replied, and the land is well situated for our purposes. Adelaide should consider the offer carefully, Martha interjected. Perhaps you could review the contract, George, before she makes any decisions. Before her father could respond, Adelaide straightened in her chair. I appreciate your concern, Mother, but I'm capable of reviewing a contract myself. Thomas taught me about such matters. She turned to Yates. I would like to see the terms in writing, Mr. Sullivan. If they're as you described, I believe we can come to an agreement. Yates nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow and bring them by your farm in the afternoon, if that's convenient. It is, Adelaide confirmed, ignoring her mother's pursed lips. After dinner, Adelaide helped clear the dishes while Yates and her father retreated to the porch with pipes. She could hear the low murmur of their conversation through the open window as she dried plates. Your Mr. Sullivan seems quite taken with you, Beatrice whispered as she handed Adelaide a wet serving dish. He's not my Mr. Sullivan, Adelaide corrected quickly. He's just a business associate. He defended you to Mother, Beatrice pointed out. No one does that. And did you see how he looked at you across the table, like you hung the moon? Don't be ridiculous, Adelaide scoffed, though her heart had inexplicably quickened. He was being polite, nothing more. Martha entered the kitchen with the last of the glasses. What are you two whispering about? Nothing, Mother, they answered in unison, exchanging sisterly glances. Martha set the glasses in the wash basin. Adelaide, I hope you're being cautious. Men like Sullivan, handsome, unmarried, new to town, they often have pasts they're running from. He's Mr. Thornton's foreman, Adelaide said evenly. I doubt he'd hire a man with a questionable background. All I'm saying is that you're vulnerable, alone on that farm, easy prey for a smooth-talking man who might see an opportunity. Adelaide set down the dish towel with deliberate care. Mother, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a grown woman capable of making my own judgments about character. Mr. Sullivan has been nothing but respectful and helpful. Martha's expression softened slightly. I only want what's best for you, Adelaide. You know that. Life has been unkind, taking Thomas and denying you children. I worry about your future. For a moment, Adelaide glimpsed the genuine concern beneath her mother's harsh words. I know, Mother, but constantly reminding me of what I lack doesn't help me build a future from what I have. Martha looked taken aback, unused to such direct speech from her typically acquiescent daughter. Before she could respond, the men came back inside, signaling it was time for Adelaide to take her leave. Yates offered to escort her home, and despite Martha's suggestion that her father could drive them both in the wagon, Adelaide accepted Yates's company for the walk back to her farm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they made their way along the dusty road, a comfortable silence between them. Your mother loves you, Yates said finally. In her way, Adelaide sighed. I know, she thinks she's protecting me from disappointment by reminding me of my limitations. Are they limitations? Yates asked. Or just different paths than the one she imagined for you? Adelaide glanced at him, surprised by the insight. I've never thought of it that way. In Manasseh, in most places, I suppose a woman without children is considered incomplete. My sister had her first child after 7 years of marriage, Yates said. The doctors had told her it would never happen, then she had 3 more in quick succession. He shrugged. Life has a way of surprising us. That's a nice story, Adelaide said, but I've accepted my reality. Thomas and I tried for 5 years. The local doctor said there's something wrong with me. My mother makes sure I never forget it. Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. Miss Keller, Adelaide, if I may, your mother is wrong about you. Adelaide felt her breath catch at the conviction in his voice. A woman's worth isn't measured by the children she bears or doesn't bear, he continued. It's in her character, her courage, her heart. From what I've seen, you have plenty of all 3. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such certainty and respect. Emotion welled in her throat, making speech impossible for a moment. Thank you, she finally managed. That's very kind, not kind, he corrected gently. Just true. They resumed walking, and Adelaide felt something shift inside her, like a window being opened in a long, closed room, letting in fresh air and sunlight. By the time they reached her farm, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I'll bring those contract papers tomorrow, Yates said as they reached her gate. Around 2 o'clock, if that suits you. That would be fine, Adelaide replied, and thank you for your company today. It made my mother's dinner considerably more bearable. He smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. The pleasure was mine, Miss Keller, truly. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. Oh, and I meant what I said about helping with that barn roof. It won't last another winter without repairs. I couldn't ask you to, you didn't ask. I offered, he said simply. Neighbors help neighbors out here. That's how the West gets settled. After he'd gone, Adelaide stood at her gate for a long time, watching the last colors fade from the sky and feeling, for the first time in years, a flutter of something that might have been hope. The next several weeks established a pattern. Yates brought the contract as promised, the terms exactly as he'd stated at Sunday dinner. Adelaide signed after carefully reading every line, and the first quarterly payment arrived promptly from Mr. Thornton's office. True to his word, Yates organized a crew to repair her fencing and mend the barn roof, though he insisted on doing much of the work himself. Adelaide found reasons to be outside when he was working, checking her garden, feeding the chickens, hanging laundry. They would exchange pleasantries that gradually evolved into longer conversations. She learned about his childhood in Texas, his years on the cattle drives, his dreams of someday having his own ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Manasseh, her love of reading, and occasionally memories of Thomas. He was a good man, she told Yates one afternoon as they sat on her porch steps, taking a break from their respective tasks. patient and kind, never blamed me for." She trailed off, still uncomfortable speaking directly about her childlessness. For not having children, Yates finished for her, his directness somehow making the topic less painful. "It wasn't yours to be blamed for, Adelaide. Some things are just in God's hands." She nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Still, I know it was a disappointment to him. He came from a large family, 5 brothers. He wanted sons of his own." "Did he ever say that?" Adelaide considered the question. "Not in so many words. But I could see it when he'd watch the Peterson boys playing in the churchyard, or when the Michaels had their new baby. There was a longing there." "That doesn't mean he was disappointed in you," Yates said gently. "Just that he had dreams, same as anyone." "Maybe," Adelaide conceded. "But now I'll never know if he resented me for it in the end." Yates was quiet for a moment. "I don't think he did. A man doesn't work as hard as Thomas did for something he resents. He builds for what he loves." The simple logic of his statement eased a knot in Adelaide's heart that had been tight for years. As summer turned to autumn, Adelaide found herself looking forward to Yates's visits. He always had some reason to stop by checking on the cattle grazing her land, bringing news from town, offering help with tasks that required a stronger back than hers. The townspeople noticed, of course. Adelaide could feel the speculative glances when she went to the mercantile or the post office. Martha Barrett certainly noticed. During Adelaide's weekly visits to her parents' home, her mother made increasingly pointed comments about that Sullivan fellow and his frequent presence at Adelaide's farm. "People are talking, Adelaide," Martha warned one afternoon as they shelled peas on the back porch. "It's not proper, a single woman receiving so many visits from an unmarried man." "He's there on ranch business, Mother, Mr. Thornton's business." Martha sniffed. "Ranch business doesn't require him to fix your chicken coop or bring you books from Denver. He's courting you, whether you admit it or not." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "He's being neighborly." "Neighborly doesn't make a man ride 15 miles to find a copy of Jane Eyre because you mentioned you'd always wanted to read it." Martha set down her bowl of peas. "Adelaide, be sensible. What future could there be with him? You already know you can't give a man children. Why encourage his attention when it can only end in disappointment?" The familiar shame washed over Adelaide, but now it was tinged with anger. "Perhaps there are men who value more in a wife than her ability to bear children." Martha looked genuinely perplexed. "What man doesn't want sons to carry on his name, especially a man like Sullivan who talks of building his own ranch someday? He'll want heirs." "You don't know what he wants," Adelaide said, her voice stronger than she intended. "And you do," Martha challenged. "Has he spoken of marriage then?" "Made his intentions clear." "No," Adelaide admitted. "We're friends, nothing more." Martha's expression softened slightly. "I don't want to see you hurt, Adelaide. You've endured enough pain. Just be careful with your heart. Men like Sullivan, handsome, charming, they can make a woman believe things that aren't real." Despite herself, Adelaide recognized the genuine concern in her mother's voice. "I am being careful, Mother, I promise." That night, returning to her farm in her father's wagon, Adelaide turned her mother's words over in her mind. Was Yates courting her? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She'd resigned herself to widowhood, to a life alone. The possibility of something else seemed too fragile to trust. And then, there was the unchangeable fact of her barrenness. Her mother was right about one thing: most men wanted children. If Yates Sullivan was developing feelings for her, didn't she owe him the truth about why a future together would be incomplete? The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The following day, Yates arrived at her farm with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "From Denver," he said, handing it to her with a smile. "The bookseller said you might enjoy this one too, if you like Jane Eyre." Adelaide unwrapped the package to find a copy of Wuthering Heights. "You remembered," she said softly, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Hard to forget anything you say, Adelaide," he replied, his blue eyes warm. She invited him in for coffee, something she'd begun doing more frequently as the autumn air grew cooler. They sat at her small kitchen table, the book between them. "Yates," she began, gathering her courage, "I need to ask you something." "Anything," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "Why do you come here so often? And please don't say it's ranch business." We both know Mr. Thornton doesn't need reports on cattle grazing every other day. A slow smile spread across Yates's face. I was wondering when you'd ask me directly. He leaned forward slightly. I come here because I enjoy your company, Adelaide. More than anyone else's in this town or any town I've been in. Her heart quickened at his words. That's very flattering, but it's not flattery, he interrupted gently. It's the truth. You're intelligent, kind, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. Being around you makes me better somehow. Adelaide took a deep breath. Yates, there's something you should know, something important. She stared down at her hands. You've heard the talk, I'm sure, about me not having children with Thomas. It's true. The doctor says I can't have children ever. I'm barren. She forced herself to look up at him, expecting to see disappointment or pity. Instead, his expression remained steady, his eyes holding hers without wavering. I know, he said simply. You know, she repeated, confused. Adelaide, I've been in Manasseh for months now. I've heard every piece of gossip this town has to share, especially about you. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Do you think that matters to me? It should, she insisted. You talk about having your own ranch someday. You'll want sons to inherit it to carry on your name. What I want, Yates said firmly, is a partner. Someone to share my life with the work, the dreams, the quiet evenings. If that partner is you, and if we're blessed with children somehow, I'd be grateful. If not, I'd still count myself the luckiest man in Colorado territory. Adelaide felt tears welling in her eyes. You can't mean that. No man, I'm not no man, he interrupted gently. I'm Yates Sullivan, and I know my own mind. He squeezed her hand. Adelaide, I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the day we met, when you picked up your mother's bread from the dirt and held your head high despite whatever pain she'd caused you. A tear slipped down Adelaide's cheek. My mother says I'm incomplete. That no man would want. Your mother is wrong about you, Yates said with such conviction that Adelaide's breath caught. You're not incomplete. You're exactly as God made you to be, and that's perfect in my eyes. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. I'm not asking for an answer today. I know this is sudden, and you have every right to take time to consider. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable, and my feelings are sincere. Adelaide looked down at this man, this strong, kind man who saw her completely and still wanted her, and felt something bloom in her heart that she'd thought had died with Thomas. I don't need time, she whispered. I've had months of watching you, talking with you, seeing the man you are. She reached out tentatively to touch his face. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Yates Sullivan. His smile could have lit the darkest night. He captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Then may I court you properly, Adelaide Keller. With your permission and with all the respect you deserve. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, you may. The town of Manasseh buzzed with the news of Yates Sullivan courting the Keller widow. Some approved, seeing it as a practical arrangement, a widow with land, a hardworking man with prospects. Others, including Martha Barrett, were more skeptical. He'll regret it when he realizes she can't give him children, Martha told anyone who would listen. Mark my words. But Adelaide found herself caring less about the town's opinion with each passing day. Yates courted her with a thoroughness that left no doubt of his intentions. He brought her not just books, but small treasures from his travels, a handkerchief embroidered with Colorado wildflowers, a silver hairpin from a Denver jeweler, a jar of honey from the new apiary north of town. More precious than these gifts were the hours they spent together, talking about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship that grew stronger by the day. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows in November that blanketed the valley in white. During one particularly fierce blizzard, Yates rode through the storm to check on Adelaide, arriving half-frozen on her doorstep. Yates Sullivan, you fool, she scolded as she pulled him inside, helping him remove his ice-crusted coat. You could have frozen to death out there. Couldn't stop thinking about you alone out here, he said through chattering teeth. Needed to make sure you had enough firewood, that the animals were secure. She built up the fire and made him sit close to it, wrapping him in a quilt Thomas's mother had made for their wedding. The animals are fine in the barn. I'm not helpless, you know. I've survived winters here before. Never doubted it, he replied, his color slowly returning. but a man's allowed to worry about the woman he loves. The simple declaration, the first time he'd used that word, directly made Adelaide's heart swell. She sat beside him, allowing him to pull her close against his side. "The storm's too bad for you to return to town," she said after a while. "You'll have to stay here tonight." Yates stiffened slightly. "That wouldn't be proper. People will talk." Adelaide laughed softly. "People already talk, and I'd rather face gossip than have your death on my conscience." She squeezed his hand. "You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I'll take the floor out here," he countered firmly. "Won't have you giving up your bed." They compromised, with Adelaide insisting on at least providing him with proper bedding for his makeshift bed by the hearth. As she prepared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and cornbread, she found herself oddly comfortable with his presence in her home, as if he belonged there. Later, as they sat together watching the fire, Yates took her hand. "Adelaide, I've been meaning to ask you something." She turned to look at him, noting the unusual seriousness in his expression. "What is it?" "Christmas is coming," he said. "I'd like to spend it with you if that's agreeable." Adelaide smiled. "Of course, though I'm expected at my parents' home for dinner, you'd be welcome to join us, I'm sure." "Actually," Yates said, "I was thinking we might spend it as husband and wife." Adelaide's breath caught. "Yates," he shifted to face her more fully. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Adelaide. I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Maybe a blizzard isn't conventional, but then neither are we." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She told me to give it to a woman with strength and grace in equal measure. I found that woman in you." Tears filled Adelaide's eyes as she stared at the ring, then at Yates's hopeful face. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "Absolutely certain, because I can't bear it if you ever regret this." "The only regret I'd have is not asking," he said firmly. "Adelaide Keller, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a life with me, whatever that life brings?" Adelaide took a shaky breath, joy and fear mingling in her chest. "Yes," she finally said. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Sullivan." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her gently. It was their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they parted, Adelaide couldn't help but laugh softly. "What's amusing?" Yates asked, still holding her hands in his. "My mother will be horrified," Adelaide admitted. "She's convinced you'll change your mind once you've had time to think about my limitations." Yates shook his head. "The only limitation I see is in your mother's understanding of what makes a family." He touched her cheek gently. "We'll be a family, Adelaide, you and me, and if God blesses us with children somehow, wonderful. If not, we'll have each other, and that's more than enough." For the first time in years, Adelaide truly believed that might be true. Telling her parents about the engagement proved every bit as difficult as Adelaide had anticipated. She and Yates made the announcement together the Sunday after the blizzard, when she brought him to the Barrett home for dinner. Martha's face went pale when Adelaide showed her the ring. "This is very sudden," she said, her voice tight. "You've known each other, what, 4 months?" "Almost 5, Adelaide corrected gently, "and we've spent nearly every day of that time together." 5 months is hardly enough time to truly know a person, Martha insisted, looking to her husband for support. "George, surely you agree this is hasty." George Barrett cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, it is rather quick, Adelaide, though Sullivan seems a steady sort." Yates met George's gaze directly. "Sir, I love your daughter. I'll provide for her, protect her, and cherish her all the days of my life. I'm asking for your blessing, but with respect, I intend to marry Adelaide with or without it." A tense silence followed his declaration. Finally, George nodded slowly. "If this is truly what Adelaide wants, you have my blessing, Sullivan." "George," Martha protested. "Mother," Adelaide interjected firmly. "I'm marrying Yates. I hope you can be happy for me, but if not, I'll understand. This is my choice." Martha's lips thinned into a hard line. "Have you told him everything, Adelaide, about why you and Thomas never had children?" "Yes, Mother. Yates knows I'm barren." "And you're content with that?" Martha turned her sharp gaze to Yates. A man in his prime, building a future, doesn't want sons to carry on his name. What I want is Adelaide, Yates replied evenly. Children would be a blessing, but they're not a condition of my love for your daughter. Martha shook her head in disbelief. You say that now, but in 5 years. 10. When your friends have sons working alongside them and you have none, you'll resent her then. That's enough, Martha, George said with unusual firmness. You've made your point. Adelaide felt Yates's hand close around hers under the table, steady and reassuring. Mrs. Barrett, Yates said, his voice respectful but unwavering. I understand your concern for Adelaide's happiness, but I need to say this plainly: your daughter is not defined by her ability or inability to have children. She's a woman of remarkable courage, intelligence, and heart. That's who I'm marrying. Martha stared at him for a long moment, then abruptly stood. Dinner will be ready soon. Adelaide, come help me in the kitchen. Without waiting for a response, she walked briskly from the room. Adelaide squeezed Yates's hand before following her mother. In the kitchen, Martha was aggressively kneading dough, much as she had been the day Adelaide had first met Yates. Mother, Adelaide began gently. He'll leave you, Martha said without looking up. Maybe not right away, but eventually. A man wants sons. It's the natural order of things. Not every man, Adelaide replied. Yates isn't like that. Martha finally looked up, and Adelaide was startled to see tears in her mother's eyes. You don't understand, Adelaide. I'm trying to protect you from heartbreak. By breaking my heart first, Adelaide asked softly. By constantly reminding me of what I lack instead of what I have to offer, Martha's hand stilled. Is that what you think I've been doing, haven't you? Since the day the doctor told me I couldn't have children, you've treated me as though I were somehow less of a woman, less worthy of love. Martha sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking older than her years. Oh, Adelaide, that wasn't my intention at all, she sighed heavily. I wanted to prepare you for the world's cruelty. Women are judged by the children they bear. It's not fair, but it's true, I thought. I thought if you accepted your limitations, you wouldn't hope for too much and be disappointed. Adelaide sat across from her mother, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. You were trying to protect me from false hope. Martha nodded. I saw how it hurt you each month when you realized you weren't with child, how you blamed yourself when Thomas fell ill, as if your barrenness somehow made him vulnerable. She reached for Adelaide's hand. I never meant to make you feel unworthy. I only wanted you to be realistic about what to expect from life. But Mother, that's where you're wrong, Adelaide said gently. Accepting limitations doesn't mean giving up on joy or love. Yates loves me exactly as I am, and I love him. Martha studied her daughter's face for a long moment. You truly believe he won't resent you someday? I believe in him, Adelaide said simply. In who he is, in his character, he's a man of his word. Something in Adelaide's certainty seemed to reach Martha. She squeezed her daughter's hand. Then I pray you're right, for both your sakes. She stood, smoothing her apron. Now, let's get this dinner on the table before your father starts complaining. It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it was a beginning. As they prepared to bring the food to the dining room, Martha paused. Christmas is in 3 weeks. When are you planning the wedding? Christmas Eve, Adelaide replied. Pastor Williams has agreed to perform the ceremony. Martha nodded briskly. Well, that doesn't leave much time for preparations. I suppose we'd better start planning tomorrow. Adelaide hid a smile, recognizing this as her mother's way of offering support. I'd like that, Mother. Thank you. The 3 weeks before Christmas passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Adelaide's sister Beatrice helped sew a new dress of ivory wool with lace trim, far finer than anything Adelaide had owned before. Yates, with Mr. Thornton's blessing and assistance, secured a small house on the edge of the Thornton Ranch property, closer to town than Adelaide's farm but still private. We can keep your land, Yates assured her as they discussed arrangements. Use it for grazing, maybe expand someday if we want to. His use of we, and the easy way he included her in his plans, made Adelaide's heart swell with gratitude and love. Word spread quickly through Manasseh about the Christmas Eve wedding. Most of the town seemed genuinely pleased for them, though Adelaide occasionally caught pitying glances aimed at Yates, as if the townspeople expected him to come to his senses about marrying a barren widow. If Yates noticed, he gave no sign. He went about his work with the same steady reliability, but now with a constant smile that Mr. Thornton teasingly said was affecting productivity, because all the young ranch hands were distracted by their foreman's unusual cheerfulness. The day before the wedding, a heavy snow began falling, blanketing Manasseh in white. Adelaide worried it might prevent guests from attending, but Yates just laughed. "It's perfect," he said as they stood on her porch, watching the snow accumulate. "Like the world is being made new for us." Adelaide leaned against his side, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Do you know what I realized this morning?" she asked. "It was exactly 6 months ago today that we met, when I dropped my mother's bread in the dirt." Yates chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "Best day of my life, that collision." "Mine too," she admitted softly, "though I wouldn't have believed it then." He turned to face her, his expression growing serious. "Adelaide, I want you to know something before tomorrow, before we stand before God and make our vows." He took both her hands in his. "I've been searching my whole life for a place that felt like home. I never found it in any town or on any ranch, but I found it the moment I met you. You're my home, Adelaide. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." Tears filled Adelaide's eyes. "Oh, Yates. I feel the same. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over the part where I belonged to someone and they belonged to me. I never imagined I'd find it again, especially with someone who knows everything about me and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," he corrected gently. "Everything about you, every part of who you are, that's who I love. Not despite anything, but because of everything." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, snowflakes clung to his eyelashes, and Adelaide thought he had never looked more handsome. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "tomorrow I become your wife." "And I become the luckiest man in the Colorado Territory," he replied, his smile warming her more thoroughly than any fire could. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the world transformed by the previous day's snowfall. Adelaide dressed carefully in her new ivory gown, Beatrice helping to arrange her hair with pearl pins and winter holly berries. "You look beautiful," Beatrice said, stepping back to admire her work. "Yates won't be able to take his eyes off you." "I still can't believe this is happening," Adelaide admitted, "that he chose me knowing everything." "Because he loves you," Beatrice said simply. "Real love doesn't come with conditions, Adelaide." A knock at the bedroom door announced Martha's arrival. She entered carrying a small wooden box. "Your father is waiting with the sleigh," she said. "It's time to go to the church." She paused, studying Adelaide with an uncharacteristic softness in her eyes. "You look lovely, daughter." "Thank you, mother," Adelaide replied, touched by the sincerity in Martha's voice. Martha held out the box. "I have something for you. It was my grandmother's and her mother's before her." Adelaide opened the box to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's tradition to give it to a daughter on her wedding day," Martha explained, her voice unusually gentle. "I should have given it to you when you married Thomas, but—" She hesitated. "But you didn't think that marriage would last," Adelaide finished, understanding dawning. "Because of my condition." Martha looked away, confirming the truth of Adelaide's words. "I was wrong," she admitted finally. "About many things, may I?" She gestured to the necklace. Adelaide nodded, turning so her mother could fasten the chain around her neck. The locket rested just below her collarbone, cool against her skin. "There," Martha said, her hands lingering on Adelaide's shoulders. "Now you're ready." The church was filled to capacity when Adelaide arrived. It seemed all of Manasseh had turned out for the Christmas Eve wedding, their faces curious and expectant as Adelaide's father escorted her down the aisle. But Adelaide saw only Yates, standing tall and handsome at the altar. He wore a new black suit with a silver brocade vest, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. The moment their eyes met, his face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that Adelaide's last doubts melted away. Pastor Williams conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth, speaking of love's endurance and God's blessing on the union of two faithful hearts. When it came time for the vows, Yates's strong voice carried clearly through the church. "I, Yates Sullivan, take thee, Adelaide Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife." To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Adelaide's voice was steadier than she'd expected, as she repeated the same sacred promise. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Yates. "You may kiss your bride." Yates's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before God and the community. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, Adelaide caught sight of her mother in the front pew. To her astonishment, Martha Barrett was crying, a smile on her face as she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration continued at the town hall, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for both Christmas and the wedding. A feast had been prepared by the women of Manasseh, with Mrs. Thornton contributing a magnificent wedding cake. Music and dancing lasted well into the evening, with Adelaide and Yates rarely leaving each other's side. Near the end of the celebration, Martha approached them, her expression unusually serene. "Adelaide Yates," she said formally, "George and I would like to give you our wedding gift." She handed Yates an envelope. He opened it, his eyebrows rising in surprise as he read the contents. "Mrs. Barrett, this is extraordinarily generous." "What is it?" Adelaide asked, looking between them. "The deed to your farm," Martha explained, "transferred to both your names. And a bank draft to help with improvements." She looked directly at Yates. "You said you dreamed of having your own ranch someday. This is a start." Adelaide was speechless, understanding what this gesture cost her proud mother, not just financially, but as an admission that she accepted their marriage as real and lasting. "Thank you, Mother," she finally managed. "This means more than I can say." "Just be happy," Martha said simply. That's all a mother really wants for her child, when all is said and done. As the evening drew to a close, Yates and Adelaide departed for their new home in a sleigh decorated with ribbons and bells, the townspeople cheering and throwing rice as they glided away into the starlit night. Their small house welcomed them with warmth, Yates having arranged for a neighbor to light the fires before their arrival. He carried Adelaide across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "It sounds wonderful when you say it," she replied, still marveling at the reality of being his wife. "I plan to say it every day for the rest of our lives," he promised, drawing her into his arms. That night, as snow fell softly outside their bedroom window, Adelaide discovered the full measure of Yates's love, tender, passionate, and complete. In his arms, she felt not broken or lacking, but whole and cherished exactly as she was. The years that followed brought challenges, as all marriages face, but Yates never once gave Adelaide reason to doubt his love or his commitment. Together they built a thriving small ranch, starting with Adelaide's land and gradually expanding as they prospered. Yates continued working for Mr. Thornton while developing their own property, his reputation for honest dealing and hard work earning them respect throughout the valley. Adelaide discovered talents she hadn't known. She possessed a head for figures that made her an excellent business partner, a way with animals that helped when calving season came, and a gift for creating a home that became a haven not just for them, but for anyone who needed shelter or comfort. They had been married just over 2 years when Adelaide began experiencing unusual fatigue and morning sickness. Afraid to hope, she said nothing to Yates until she was certain. When Dr. Miller confirmed what seemed impossible, she wept with joy and disbelief. She told Yates that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a tradition they'd established early in their marriage. "Yates," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "do you remember when we met, how my mother said I was barren?" He took her hand, his expression softening as it always did when this painful subject arose. "I remember telling you she was wrong about you." Adelaide placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You were right, we're going to have a baby." The wonder that dawned on his face was something Adelaide knew she would remember until her dying day. "Adelaide," he breathed, his voice choked with emotion. Are you certain? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Dr. Miller says I'm about 3 months along. The baby should come in late summer. Yates gathered her into his arms, his own eyes wet. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for this gift. I didn't think it was possible, she admitted, all those years with Thomas. Maybe it just wasn't the right time, Yates suggested gently. Or the right man. Adelaide touched his face lovingly. You are definitely the right man, Yates Sullivan, the only man I can imagine sharing this miracle with. The pregnancy progressed without complications to Dr. Miller's pleased surprise. As Adelaide's body changed, Yates treated her with such tender consideration that she sometimes teased him about coddling her. He would only smile and say, I'm just making sure my 2 favorite people are comfortable. Martha Barrett was struck speechless when Adelaide and Yates shared their news. For a moment, Adelaide feared her mother might doubt the truth of it, but instead, Martha did something Adelaide had never seen before she wept openly, pulling Adelaide into a fierce embrace. My prayers, she said through her tears. All these years I've prayed for this for you even when the doctors said it was impossible. You never told me, Adelaide said, surprised. Martha wiped her eyes. I didn't want to give you false hope, but I never stopped asking God for this miracle. It was a turning point in their relationship. Throughout the pregnancy, Martha became the supportive, loving mother Adelaide had always longed for, knitting baby clothes, sharing wisdom about childbirth and infant care, and visiting regularly to help with household tasks as Adelaide's condition advanced. On a sweltering August evening in 1881, after 18 hours of labor with Dr. Miller, Martha, and Yates all in attendance, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy son with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him Thomas Yates Sullivan, honoring both the husband who had loved Adelaide through difficult years and the father who had made this miracle possible. Holding her son for the first time, Adelaide looked up at Yates, who stood beside the bed with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. You were right, she whispered. My mother was wrong about me. I knew it the moment I met you, he replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and gathering his family into his arms. You were always meant for this happiness, Adelaide, always. 2 years later, Adelaide gave birth to twin girls they named Sarah and Elizabeth, completing their family in a way neither had dared to dream possible. The Sullivan Ranch prospered along with their family, becoming known throughout the valley for its fine horses and cattle. Adelaide's relationship with her mother deepened into genuine friendship as the years passed. Martha doted on her grandchildren and finally admitted to Adelaide that her harshness had come from fear that Adelaide would face the cruelty of a world that valued women primarily as mothers. I thought I was protecting you, Martha confessed one afternoon as they watched the children playing in the yard. Instead, I was the cruelest voice of all. You did what you thought was right, Adelaide said gently. And perhaps, in some strange way, your words prepared me to recognize true love when it came. Yates loved me when he believed I could never give him children. That's how I knew it was real. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Adelaide with a locket to match the one her mother had given her, this one containing tiny portraits of their 3 children. For the woman who made me a father when neither of us thought it possible, he said as he fastened it around her neck. For the woman who has been my home, my heart, and my happiness for 20 years. Adelaide touched the locket, then reached up to caress his face, now lined with the evidence of years spent working under the Colorado sun. Do you ever think about that day we met, when I dropped my mother's bread in the dirt? Yates smiled, the same smile that still made her heart quicken after all their years together. Only every day, best accident of my life. Mine too, Adelaide agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as she had thousands of times before. The very best accident. That evening, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done nearly every evening of their married life. Their son, now a young man of 19, was attending college in Denver, studying modern farming techniques he planned to bring back to the family ranch. The twins, 17 and as different as two sisters could be, were inside practicing the piano pieces they would play at the upcoming church social. "We've been blessed beyond measure," Adelaide said softly, her head resting against Yates's shoulder. "Yes, we have," he agreed, his arm secure around her. "Though I was blessed the moment you agreed to be my wife, children or no children," Adelaide smiled, knowing the truth of his words in the deepest part of her heart. "You always saw me, Yates, not what I lacked, but who I was." "And who you are is exactly who I needed," he replied. "The perfect woman for me." As the last light faded from the sky, Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance meeting on a dusty street to 20 years of love, challenges, joy, and growth. She thought of her mother's words that long ago day in the kitchen, about being as barren as the desert, and she smiled to herself. Even the desert blooms magnificently, given the right conditions and tender care. All it needs is someone who sees the beauty and potential beneath the surface, someone who believes in what others cannot see. Yates had been that someone for her. "I love you," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she'd spoken them. "And I love you," he answered, turning to kiss her in the gathering darkness. "Today and always."